Stepping out of the CEO role was supposed to create growth for the company and personal freedom for the founder. Instead, Chris Schwalbach was watching his company, AVL Growth Partners, wobble from the sidelines. It took him going back and rereading a journal entry from months prior, and that really became evidence for him that this experiment with the new CEO just wasn't working and he was needed back in his company. In this episode, Chris shares why he thinks his very deliberate multi year succession plan veered off course, how he dealt with his feelings of failure when he had to come back into the role. And he teaches us about the inner work he did while he was away from the business that allowed him to come back as a better leader in his 2.0 version. If you're ever thinking about handing off your role to a new CEO in the future or dreaming of that possibility, this episode really shares some mistakes to avoid or missteps to avoid, share some really important advice for coming back into the business successfully and how to do it better the second time around. I'm so excited to share this episode with you, and I hope you'll enjoy it. Welcome to The Conscious Entrepreneur, the only podcast 100% dedicated to the well-being of entrepreneurs. It's where founders come to sharpen their edge from the inside out and lead with clarity, connection, and purpose, without buying into hustle culture or burning out. Hit subscribe right now so you never miss an episode. Let's get started. So, a warm welcome to Chris Schwalbach, who is here for a second visit to The Conscious Entrepreneur. We will put a link in the show notes to his first episode, which was really this story of Chris's replacing himself as CEO at AVL Growth Partners. Chris, could you take us back to 2009 and tell us a little bit about the company and your vision for it when you started it?
Yeah, I mean, it was a long time ago now. So one of the things that I was rolling out of a CFO role at a tech startup, and I realized, one of the things that was going on is like part of my time I was as a CFO, I was doing capital raises and board meetings and forecasts, and I was also kind of doing controller work and I was doing accounting work, and I was kind of being distracted. And I realized that, I was a very expensive resource for this early stage startup. And so I was trying to say like, well, I would love to do consulting work as a CFO for some businesses. And why didn't companies do that? And I ran into a venture banker who said, "Hey, this is happening all over Silicon Valley. There's a lot of these fractional CFO shops, and this is how they work." And I became really intrigued because I came from consulting in my prior life, and I really enjoyed my consulting work. So I was just like, How can I potentially do that?" So I just like looked at these fractional CFO models in Silicon Valley and said, I'm doing that in Colorado. And I just started doing it with 5 or 6 companies and started adding accountants and controllers, and then more accountants, more controllers. And then one day someone said, "Well, why don't you add a CFO too?" And I'm like, "Well, I'm the CFO." It's like, "Well, why not have multiple CFOs?" And so it just and it I think that the model continues to be more and more accepted. In 2009, people didn't know what the word fractional was. It was not even on the radar yet. People were concerned if I wasn't in the office with them, and now it's becoming more and more de facto in terms of how do you start and grow a company. And so now we modified our mission to being pivotal to your growth, because I think we are becoming this pivotal resource during a very important growth stage of companies, and that's kind of what we've continued to do for 15 plus years now. Yeah.
And tell me about where the company is now and your decision to replace yourself as CEO.
So yeah, so then we continue to grow and we continue to scale. And I think one of the things that I noticed back in 2019 or 2020, it was actually 2019, is we were like, hey, we kept running against certain ceilings. We kept running into, like, we'd get to a certain s- get to the business to a certain space, whether that be the number of clients or number of people, and then we would just regress. So we would just like hit the ceiling and then we'd knock ourselves back down. We'd hit the ceiling, we'd knock ourselves back down. And I'm like, what is going on here? And it was, after talking with a few folks, it was just like, it's just this operational debt. Like, we just didn't have this strong processes. We were doing things kind of by the seat of our pants as a business a little bit. more than we should have been at that size. And so we said, we needed some operational um, and prowess. And what I kind of said is like, what this company would really benefit from is someone who's taken a company from 20 million to 200 million and knows what that journey looks like. And that's a journey I hadn't been on. So I'm like recognizing that I hadn't been on that journey and that someone else has been on that journey. And let's bring them in as part of this organization to help us figure out how to cross that chasm, whatever we were facing and wherever it was coming from.
And Chris, when you brought this person into your organization, was there already a seed that was being planted about actually replacing yourself as CEO, or was this a gap in the operations that you were looking to fill with a COO?
I think it was a little bit of I think it was both. I think it was like, hey, I really thought that if we brought a strong operating person that it could be eventually like this path to saying let's focus on operations and migrate the role to be the CEO and leader of the company. And really the thought that I had at the time was with a strong company I've been leading for a long time, what kind of fresh ideas might be out there, what kind of new energy would be out there, what and did I potentially financially be able to do it is kind of like transition the owner the ownership of running the company to to that person and to this executive team. And I'm like, okay, I think we can make this happen. And and that's kind of where it started. So it was like it was a long, not long, but it was in a very intentional journey. It was like multiple years in the making, and I stepped away incrementally. So at one point I was in weekly meetings, and then I got out of weekly meetings. I went to monthly meetings. I got out of monthly meetings, went to quarterly meetings, and slowly backed away so that this that our new COO CEO could kind of like continue to grow in their leadership capacity within the organization. So I thought we did a really good job at that stage of kind of thinking through it. Yeah.
And I'm sure there are so many people, so many founders that are listening to this episode thinking, we've all thought of, how could that look for myself and what would that process be like? And will I ever be able to do such a thing? I mean, it does sound like a dream. And, data tells us that founders do think about this, hopefully years ahead of the need to actually do it. What do you think you got really, really right about the process? And as you were thinking about, this transition out, what would you change?
Yeah. I think it was there's so so much. I mean, I really loved how we were intentional about it and how we took our time and how we introduced, you know, the COO into the business and how we increased that individual's scope and how we eventually transitioned to CEO. Like I think we were very communicative and thoughtful in doing that. I think that as part of the story, and now I've come back in as CEO, and so kind of like what was the learning of that? And I think, I think it's, you know, a lot of it I think I would share is like kind of like setting it up for success. So one, I think really forcing ourselves to craft a shared vision that was a little bit like, how are we doing this? What is in knowing what that, you know, how we were going to get there in a very, very um, in a very I want to say detailed way, but still strategic way. And I think knowing kind of like in doing that and sharing that strategic vision and vision building is kind of like role clarity. Like what is the role of the CEO? What is my role? And how do we clarify that in a more deliberate way? How are we going to work together? And what does that look like? I think the other thing that I reflect back on is I noticed we always had, one-on-one conversations, and I think that having a board or having other people involved to kind of like who are along the journey, along the way, would have been really helpful to our conversation. So I think about like had as I embarked on this process to this operation and scaling process, had I started with a board first, I think that would have been very helpful for me. And I've subsequently done that as I've come back into the as CEO. That one of the first things I did was put in a board, and I think this is part of the work that I've been working on is like how to ask for help, how to ask for help, and I think that's something that's been important to me in coming back and recognizing that had I done that a little earlier, it might have had an impact on kind of what we did. So I think those are some of the big ones for me.
Right. And so, one of the other things that we talked about was, you know, recognizing, in your hire in the selection process of the COO and finding somebody who really was able to leapfrog the whole business forward from this operations and scaling point of view. They had really, really strong strengths in areas, but you kind of maybe missed or undervalued your own role in what the company would lack with you not in the CEO role. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I think about we had a 10 plus years, and the company had grown, successfully. We had consecutive years of growth. We were growing the team. People liked being there. Culturally, it was working. Reputation and brand, it was working. We had a great product in terms of what we delivered to clients. Like there's a lot of things working. And so when I was talking about operational scale and hitting these ceilings, I think my lens or my perspective was like, um, you're not serving the business well. You're the bottleneck. You're creating all these issues. You're making the business suffer without also having the other side of the coin saying, but you've built a really good business. You know how to sell. You know how to create a product. You know how to create great culture. You know how to create a strong team. And I think some of those things that I undervalued in terms of like thinking through what did I bring to the organization, and what was if I moved out of the organization, kind of what were the things that I would be taking with my no longer presence in the organization. So yeah, I definitely didn't think about or didn't kind of totally view that as um, as deftly as I could have at the time. I think, yeah.
As you take yourself back to the time where you were now sort of out of the seat and you were in more of a almost like a consultative, relationship with the CEO, it sounds like that didn't have as much definition maybe as you in reflection, maybe as it could have, but could you take us back to sort of what was going on, inside of you? What was that journey like kind of watching from the sidelines, and when did you decide when did you start saying to yourself, "Hmm, maybe I need to come back," and what was happening in your inner journey?
The inner journey was, yeah, it was interesting. So I think that one of the things I shared with you earlier was like I had um I was looking through an old journal book, and I uncovered this journal entry that was made that I said, this is how I'm feeling right now about the kind of the business and kind of what's been going on, and I had this angst around it and this uncertainty and this and disease, and I realized when I picked the book back up, months later, like the feelings hadn't changed, right? The feelings were still there, and I'm like, okay. So it was a moment of kind of like, okay, are you gonna are you gonna do something, or are you going to not do something, right? Because your feelings are not changing. So either you're gonna choose to accept and like kind of surrender, or you're gonna say that something's gonna happen, right? And I think that was a big um, that was a big part of it. Now, what was hard for me was, I think one of the things that was hard for me was like I viewed if I was going to come back, like it felt like failure. It felt like the plan didn't work, and this felt like announcing to the world that this like my grand scheme or grand plan of all this whole thing didn't work, and it felt, I had a little shame around it. I had a little bit of like, didn't appreciate it, and I think that was tough. And so that was a little bit of the work that I was doing. I think the other thing is like when I looked at the business, like and what was going on, it was a little bit of like self trust and like, do I trust myself that I'm discerning about what I'm looking at? Am I looking at it with bias? Am I looking at it with clarity? And do I trust myself that how I'm looking at this? And so there was a lot of trust work that, and that goes back to the prior years of like, you knew you ran this business fairly well. You had some things. Are there gaps? Yes. But like when I'm looking at this from the perspective, it was just kind of like I I learned how to differentiate between trust and discernment a lot more, and I think that was a big growth area for me during this time.
How did you reframe this feeling of sort of shame or failure around, I made this plan, I selected this person, I've created this entire scenario and now it's not working and I need to come back in. How did you get yourself out of that mindset of, this is bad, I'm nosing in, I'm I'm sticking my nose where I shouldn't be, sort of that this isn't even my role, I shouldn't be having these conversations. How did you kind of work through that for yourself? What was the reframe?
Well, I think it was a little bit of, you know, basically going to close friends and advisors and saying, "This is how I'm feeling," and having them kind of react to it and saying like, or like a investment banker, remember that I had a conversation where he's like, "Oh, this happens all the time. This happens all the time. It's very common." It's like, "You're not special." It's like, "Oh, okay." And, that was part of it. I think part of it is like seeing it as, I had 2.5 years away, and a lot of people view that as like how amazing an opportunity you had for 2.5 years. And so they're like, "Did you have an amazing 2.5 years?" I'm like, "I did." And they're like, "No one gets that. What a blessing." I'm like, "Okay." There's like, so I think that was a little bit of a reframe for me as well. I got a tremendous, blessings and time with my family, both my immediate family and extended family. And it's just like that. I did so many cool things during that period of time. And so I'm like, okay, let's chalk that up. So that was a good reframe for me. And then I think just even talking to some of our employees, they're just like, I don't view it that way at all. I view it as very much just I mean, what a success or what an opportunity, or you tried. That was another one. It's like you tried, and it was like a lot of people don't take the shot, and you tried it. So I think it was. I think others helped me kind of out of it more than I helped myself, but just kind of like recognizing the feeling and sharing that with others is kind of the thing that started it for me.
That's beautiful. Did you so as you've come back into the business and you're there now, you've been there for about 9 months, how is Chris, CEO 2.0 different than Chris CEO 1.0?
Well, I'd say, I think I break it up into like two parts. I mean, I've been back for 9 months. I think upon getting back into the seat, I felt very energetic. I was moving very fast, and I think the speed that I had was related to when I came back in. I think it was like as the kind of the colloquial saying is like I had been inside the jar, but now that I've been outside the jar, I could read the label really clearly, and so I saw so many things that were opportunities, and I moved fast against those opportunities. And because it was an organization I was very familiar with, like I was very comfortable in kind of like moving quickly and deftly, in terms of doing that. And so I think um, I came back almost like when a CEO goes away to a conference and gets like 17,000 ideas and then comes back to their company and it's like, "Oh, I got 17,000 ideas." And the company's like, "Oh, Jesus." Like our CEO's back from the conference with ideas. Great. And like, I think that's probably how I rolled in. I rolled in hot. And, I think that as I'm 9 months in, I think there's some good that's come of that. I think asking for help. I did again ton of work on. I grew up as a very do it yourself. The only one you can like trust yourself, being independent, and I think that that going solo, I think was a kind of the thing that was a B1. B2 is like receiving help and receiving help from others and receiving guidance from others creates capacity in me. And so I had more capacity to do more if I was able to receive the help and receive the guidance from others. And I think that is a very much of a 2.0 thing that I brought back, and I think that has some very positive dynamics, kind of what we're seeing. Um, I think just accepting, as I was kind of coming back in, this accepting of the failing or reframing this failing. There was more fails as I got involved, and I think back in the company, and I think this acceptance of failing fast. It's like, hey, we tried this, didn't work. We tried this, didn't work. We made some quick decisions. Now, again, I look back and I'm like, yeah, probably moved too fast or probably tried to swallow too much, versus like, and so, but I think that comfortability with failing fast was helpful in coming back. And I think that with the willingness to fail fast, I also had a more of a decisiveness. Like, hey, like I don't think I sat on things as long as I used to. Like, let me think about this for 3 more weeks, or let's. I think I'm getting a little bit more decisive. I see it slip every once in a while, but I think decisiveness is another one. I think the biggest positive that I've seen is just for me is through a lot of the work that I've done over the last couple of years is just like my sense of worry, I would say is, it's not like my blood pressure is always low. It does get high, but I think my sense of worry around the business is at a different, it's a much lower level. I think things would set me off much more in a much more exacerbated way in version 1.0. And now it's kind of like, okay, we're here, and I think it has to do with there's a lot more trust in the business as a whole. Like I know that the business is solid and there's certain things that work against us, like we lose a client or we kind of lose a person. And I certainly am sad that those things happen and disappointed and whatever. But I don't have worry around that one thing being catastrophic as much as because I think that the whole is strong. So it feels like for me, I feel like I worry my level of overall worry is much lower. Now, what's the not good? Like what are the learnings? Like I think when I could say is like when I came back and the speed of change, I think was really high. And I think it was a little disorienting.
So digging into that a little bit more, I'd love to kind of talk more about how this relationship between you coming back into this role and how you worked with, different parts of the business, leadership layers of the team, and then, the team as a whole, and how you sort of framed this coming back in, how you managed expectations with them and kind of how that process worked for you, because I could imagine that was a tough moment for you and for the business a little bit.
Yeah, I think um I think there was a recognition that the business was um I would just say it had too high of an expense profile. Like we were spending money too fast relative to where we were, and that like, and I think even the team, the blessing was my team is all accountants, controllers, and CFOs, so they're really good at financials. And so when you
They had
say
an inkling.
they had a very strong inkling, and they're just like, what are we spending on? And so they were recognizing like, let you know, is this really efficient? So I think there was some backing there. um, and then I think what I wanted to do was, in the first, 60 days or so is kind of like, what's the key themes here? What are the themes that we want to build and kind of like have as our constant, North Star? And so, and I think we created two themes. One was just like on reframing top line, how we're going to grow. Like, what are we going to do to make it, to shift our growth strategy and make, because I think once when we're busy and we're getting new clients, like all boats rise with the tide. It certainly helps. And then I think the next theme was just we called it flatten and connect. And so the connecting was just like how do we connect as a team more, more readily, and how do we connect better? And I think that as much as I had those words and that intention of like connecting better, I think the communications and the change management around that probably didn't align. And like that was probably my learning is just like how to and I think I almost would like if I had my druthers in the sense of like I would go back and say having someone kind of take the perspective of what are all these messages, how do they fit, what is the team hearing, because sometimes when you're driving the bus it's all clear to you because you're looking out the windshield but it's not clear to anybody else, and my words don't necessarily translate to how someone's hearing it. I think it's more listening. It's more like, to me, if it was, let's just say if I was top down messaging, I didn't have I wasn't taking the time to put the feelers in at the front lines to talk to like to have one-on-one conversations and saying, "How are you doing?" I think my intent, like I would say my intent was there, but I picked up so many like projects and things that I wanted to go do, I'd left out the time that I reserved that I wanted to reserve to have those conversations. And I think that was short-sighted.
Well, that's great. I mean, that's something that somebody who's listening to this episode can say, "I'm gonna make sure that I don't make that mistake."
And I think the hard thing is like when you if for us, if we sell more deals, if we have more clients and everyone's it's got the work that they want and we're kind of growing, that concept of all boats rise with the tide. Like everyone will be happy when we have more clients, we have more work, we have all these exciting things, and so when we have those things, and so my head goes to, well, let me just solve that problem, and if I solve that problem, then everything's going to be okay. But the journey along the way, if they're left uninformed or don't feel part of the solve, it doesn't it's harder to bring them along. So, and I think that's kind of like that's where I think I really have opportunity. Yeah, as a leader, I'm trying to step back into some one-on-one conversations. But I think one of the things I'm talking about and is like it was one of our CFOs, and we were saying like, there's some nervousness in the team, and I said I acknowledge that nervousness, and the CFO has had a recent college graduate and I have a recent college graduate. And so I said, "Are you nervous about when you think about your college graduate, are you nervous about them getting a job, entering the world, kind of like taking the next step, becoming, being able to pay rent, getting, living outside the house?" And like you'd say, "Well, yeah, sure as hell I'm nervous. Yeah, I'm nervous. Like, how are they going to do this? How are they going to?" And then it's like, but when you take a different lens, if you say, "Are you worried about them as a human being in the world and how they're going to do and how they're going to show up in the world?" You're like, "No. I know that I know that I know my kid is going to be okay. I just don't know how they're going to get to tomorrow." Right? So it's like it's kind of like the days are long, but the years are short, kind of a perspective. And so I think it's like, yes, there's a lot of things that make us nervous or nervous or concerned in the micro, but taking a moment to kind of like, let's look at the macro. Let's look at kind of what we've got as an organization and where we stand and what are we really building on, right? So I think that's kind of the message I'm trying to share. It's like, are we talking about the battle or the war? There's all sorts of metaphors around here, but it's like I, I get nervous about, a kid, in a very micro situation, but it's like overall, when I think about them, I think it's about really healthy. So when I think about AVL, there's certain things, and I'm like, that's frustrating and that's extremely painful, like, but if I look at the arc in terms of like what we've come from and where we are, and even if you do this within the year, so you could say there's a moment where you can say, okay, it's basically June 1st. So it was like June 1st. What are all the things on our list that haven't been done yet that need to get done? That's a one person. That's kind of one perspective. The other, so like, and those are important to do because you got to look at what needs to be accomplished. But taking a moment for myself, and this is important and hard for me as an entrepreneur, would say, okay, let's go back to January 1st and let's write everything down. Let's write what down everything that we've accomplished and solved and addressed from January 1 to June 1. And when you do that and you kind of reflect on like what has been accomplished, you're like, oh my gosh, we're in such a better place than we were even 5 months ago. And that
Sure,
feels
this is
good.
the gap in the gain, right?
The
And
gap in
you
the game. Yeah. And so I was trying to do it without kind of like the language of it, but yes, it's exactly the gap in the game. And it's but taking that moment with the team to kind of say, let's, when we do an update, let's remind ourselves where we've been, you know. And so I think that that's probably pretty important. And because I think if you look at, financial metrics or client metrics, like we're doing some really good things. Do we have disappointments in there? Yes, absolutely. But we have to kind of like keep our eyes on the bigger picture too. So
I like that. So as we kind of wrap up the conversation, I think one of the things I'm curious about, and a little jealous of, is that you said, you're really going through all of the wins and the losses that we all have every single day, um, in our roles, and you're kind of dealing with less anxiety and less worry than ever before. And one of the things we always talk about on the Conscious Entrepreneur is kind of what are your personal habits and what are the resources that you've created for yourself that are allowing you to kind of move through these things with ease. I'd love for you to share maybe some of those tips that other founders you know, could echo.
yeah, I wish I had some like zinger on my list. I think one of the things that I really embraced while I was off was what I called my slow mornings, and I had a very intentional morning around um, exercise or or reading or just being or journaling and just kind of like being slow. And I think I've really tried to protect that time for myself in this V2, and that's been a big thing for me. But I think overall this worry, um, I think the worry for me has been this has really been working on the self trust and like knowing like that you've been here before. And I think another one that I do is like if you deal with if you're in a tough situation and you'd say, okay, let's think about a tough situation or a tough conversation or a tough, let's say it's a tough person, employee conversation. And you're like, okay, how many times have you been in a conversation like this before? And how many times did it go well? And how many times did it go bad? And our minds kind of tend to think about all the ones that went bad. But if you actually go through it and you'd say, well, so many of these went well. And so you build that self-trust to say, no, you've done 20 of these conversations before, and 18 out of 20 of them went amazingly well. And so it resets for me, it's been a reset of the mind to say, like, no, you've done this, you can do this, right? And so I think before I would concentrate on the two fails rather than focusing on the 18 wins, right? And to me, that kind of builds that self trust, and the self trust builds kind of helps kind of reduce that worry to say you know how to find your way. You know how to find your way. You've done this for a long time. You know how to find your way. Are there imposter syndromes that show up every day? Yep. Are there things that you absolutely don't know how to do and you make a bad decision? Yep. And but the times when it does work clearly outnumber the ones where it doesn't work, and it's just like keeping the practice of reminding myself that that's truth, that's true, and that allows me to kind of like not have as much worry around it.
That's lovely.
And do I still worry? Hell yeah, I still worry. It's okay. But it's
You're
a
gonna
lot
worry,
less.
right? But I think what you're sharing is incredibly valuable because we do need to recognize our strengths and remind ourselves of the facts because sometimes the scary things can just, all the bad outweighs the good. And so if you can have a practice, whether it's journaling or whatever sort of reflection works best for you, but finding those wins, and giving yourself that pat on the back to say, I am well resourced, I'm capable, I can do this, and kind of accept positive failures. You're always going to have some failures, but find the good in them is what I'm hearing you say. And so I think that's really good advice.
I do two other quick like kind of like practices, which is one is on my I have one page on my notebook that's my monthly rocks. And so like these are the 6 or 8 things I want to try to get done in the month. Some of them are personal, some of them are business. But below those rocks for the month, I have kind of like a whole page that just says what were the things in that what were the things in this month that brought me joy, and what were the what were the exciting moments of the day or whatever. And so each day or thereabouts, I just put a little phrase like that workout, that hike with this person, or winning this deal. And so I have an ability when I look at my rocks on a daily basis, I can go look at the last 20 days and say, what happened that was exciting. And the other thing I've used is like, um, I've used the journal app that the iPhone journal app made by Apple, and I don't journal from the perspective of emotions and feelings. It's almost like a journal. I have that elsewhere, but this journal is just a reminder of like the pictures of what you did during the month and what all happened and who were you with and where did you go. And so I can like scroll through the month of May and get a quick reminder of all the amazing things that happened, right? And so I had, a college graduation this day, and then I did this hike with the dog this day, and then I had a high school graduation, then we had a party, then we had dinner with friends, and then we did this. Like, and I think, and when you rewind all those things, you'd say I get a quick glimpse of like the rich life that's there, and it's a helpful gratitude reminder. I think both of those things for me serve as that.
I really like this idea of just kind of keeping a win sheet because we do have that recency bias of not really being able to think of things that happened 2 weeks ago, but the things that happened yesterday or the day before looming so large. So that's a great tip.
I actually have a CEO in Atlanta that I know that whenever he gets a compliment or words of thanks in an email, he prints it out and he has his appreciation folder right in his desk. And if he ever feels blue, he pulls it out and he has all these emails from people that tell him how awesome he has been and how thankful they are for him and all this kind of stuff. And it's like it helps me so much get back on track. I'm like, oh,
It's
that's
evidence,
what an
right?
angle.
It's
I said, I
real
don't know if I have
evidence.
any emails to print out, but I think that's maybe something I should be looking more for. But yeah,
Maybe if you look for it, you'll find it.
yeah, exactly. So I think that was a neat practice for him. But yeah, I think it's keeping it front and center is kind of fun. Originally I did the journal because like I'm starting to forget where I had dinner or where we went and all this kind of, it's like where were we when we did this? So I was just like I'm keeping a tracker like of like where we were and what restaurant we went to because I'm like I don't want to forget these things and I want to go back. And so but it's turned out to be so much more than that for me.
I love that. Well, thank you for sharing those sort of tactical tips because I think we can put those to work for ourselves as well, and maybe we'll be able to accomplish what you've accomplished, which is a little bit less worry and a little bit more confidence and self trust in the CEO journey. So, thank you for sharing all of this. I think there was a lot of vulnerability, and I think our listeners will benefit from it. So, thank you for offering that to us.
You bet. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thanks for watching The Conscious Entrepreneur. If something landed for you, will you leave a comment? I'd love to hear what you thought. And if you haven't done it yet, hit that subscribe button so you never miss an episode. Thanks so much, and I'll meet you here next week.